Hey guys, it's Patrick of Laugh at Pat fame, although you probably realize that if you're watching this video. It's the first Wednesday of the month, and the first Wednesday of every month we do a video podcast. But this month I wanted to do something a little bit different in honor of Mental Health Awareness Week. I wanted to share my experience and struggle with depression. So yeah, no ha-has this week. Check back next week for the fun, silly ha-has. This will be a little bit more serious, but I don't know, this is something I've wanted to share in some way for a while, and now I kind of feel ready, and I thought that this might be the right place to do it. I wrote out what I want to say because I kind of wanted to choose my words wisely. So this week's podcast is just going to be me reading something that I wrote about my struggle with depression. And I'm wearing my cozy clothes because for some reason I feel like if you're talking about mental health, you should be wearing cozy clothes and be cozy. So let's begin. I'm a little nervous, which is fun and different, but we'll do it. So one reason I wanted to share my experience of struggling with depression is that I think most people I present as a very happy guy. Most of the times this is a comedy channel, and I think it's important to remember mental health issues aren't always apparent on the surface. The other reason I wanted to share my experience is because I think it's so helpful when you are struggling to know that there isn't something wrong with you, and that a lot of people around you have gone through similar things. So today I'm going to talk about the period where I was most severely depressed and what tools I developed along the path to being a much happier person. When I was 21, I was diagnosed as being clinically depressed. I remember when my therapist told me that, it was actually a huge relief because until that point, I really thought I was just like a piece of shit who couldn't get it together. To think of what was happening to me as a disease or a medical condition made it feel less personal and more solvable. In the years since I was diagnosed, I've thought a lot about what might have led me to this severe depression. In the moment, all I could tell was that something was wrong. But with some time and reflection, I've been able to understand more of what was happening. I think I always had some underlying issues with depression. I had been depressed before, but because it wasn't so severe, I had never been diagnosed, and I didn't think of myself as a depressed person. Then, during my junior year of college, in the span of a few months, my serious relationship ended. My career as a distance runner, which was most of my identity at that point, came to an end, and I found out that my mom had gotten cancer. She's totally fine now. These events, in combination with some poor choices and habits on my part, I believe set in motion my descent into my first severe depression. Ultimately, the reasons why I started to feel this way aren't that important. In fact, part of my journey towards healing has been to realize that I didn't need reasons to be depressed, and that I could grant my suffering the significance it had on my life, despite the fact that I was privileged in so many ways. Nothing happened all at once. My depression crept up on me like a slow-moving fog that slowly crests the hill and begins descending through the trees. It's not like I had these dramatic events happen in my life and immediately I couldn't leave my bed. It was much more insidious than that. I knew I was upset, and the quiet moments in between felt somehow more hollow and scary. So I started to feel the need to fill my life so that there was never a quiet moment. I could get by if I was drinking and partying or getting stoned and losing entire days to watching a TV show. My life felt empty, and the way I began to fill it was by getting fucked up. I felt like if I was partying, I was doing something. Now, before I go on, I should say that I still drink and enjoy marijuana, and that even now, 9 years later, I still have a complicated relationship with these substances that is healthier, but is by no means perfect. But the relationship I had with drinking and smoking during this period was, in fact, incredibly toxic. I got into this unhealthy cycle where the only time I felt happy was when I started drinking, which always escalated to drinking too much, which then led me to having anxiety and being hungover, which I would remedy by furiously smoking pot, dulling my hangover but heightening my anxiety, which I would then remedy by starting drinking again. And so I passed weeks and then months like this, never addressing what I was feeling, trapped in a constant struggle to numb any emotion that arose in me. It was college, and I was mostly a fun drunk, so nobody said much about my ever-increasing partying. But my mental state was deteriorating more and more. The fog of depression continued its slow march forward. I had always been a good student, not great, but motivated. It started with one assignment. I think it was a paper. I just couldn't get myself to do it, and so for the first time in my life, I just didn't. And there was something thrilling and freeing about it. Nothing happened. My world didn't crash down. Life just went on. So then I just stopped doing any assignments. And pretty soon, cutting a few classes here or there turned into not going to class at all. Suddenly, the thrill and freedom of blowing off assignments in classes turned into a maze I could not escape. I would know that I had to go to my next class or I would fail it. And I would sit on the couch and watch as the clock ticked by. 5 minutes before I needed to leave to make it to class on time, and the time I should start getting ready if I wanted to make it, and I wouldn't get up. I need to leave right now if I want to make it on time, and I wouldn't get up. I would see, all right, the class starts in 5 minutes. If I leave now, I would be late, but I could still make it, and I wouldn't get up. Class has now started, and I'm not going. In fact, I couldn't do just about anything. As my depression wore on and became more severe, I oftentimes felt like I was trapped inside my own body, that I was totally out of control of the decisions I was making. I would know what thing I needed to do, but I felt totally powerless to be able to do it. Again and again, I would watch myself making a decision that I knew was making me feel worse, and all I could do was start to drink and smoke and try to numb the horror of whatever I was hurtling towards. The mornings were always the worst for me, because for one brief moment as I would wake up, the weight of my world hadn't come rushing in like water on a sinking ship. For this brief moment before I was totally awake, I could forget how much pain I was in. But every morning as sleep finally receded, it would all come crashing back into focus, and the familiar pit in my stomach would return, like I was constantly nervous about something that was already happening. It got so bad that I started loading up my bong and leaving it on my bedside table each night so that as soon as I was touched by the cold reality of morning, I could immediately try to dull the pain. I even joked about it to friends, passing it off as fun stoner wake and bake nonsense rather than the sad reality it was. I struggled on like this for a while, careful to try to keep up the perception of being the life of the party, eagerly agreeing to plans that involved drinking, but withdrawing more and more every day. Some of my friends noticed, and some didn't. I cherished the friends who reached out to me, but oftentimes it only made me retreat more. I'm not sure when this dark seed was planted, but at some point I started to think, I can't live like this for another 60 years. If this is what life is going to be like, I can't make it through a lifetime of this. It's not worth it. This dark little thought continued to grow, watered by my substances and my self-hatred, until I can't live like this for another 60 years turned into I can't live like this for another year, turned into I can't live like this for another week, turned into I want to die. This dark thought spiraled further and further out of control until it consumed me. It felt like it was all that I could think about. I wrote goodbye notes to my parents and my roommates. One week, 3 or 4 times, I walked out to this bridge high above the waterfall that ran through the city where I went to school. Body tingling, not sure what I was going to do. But every time after I looked over the edge, I thought, not tonight. I hesitate to even say that I was suicidal. Even now, I question if my own dangerous thoughts were legitimate because I never seriously attempted something, or if it's just part of a narrative I've crafted to make sense of this time in my life. What I can say now, and I also knew then, was that this was unhealthy and extremely dangerous. I was lucky because at that point, I was so paralyzed, I couldn't even ask for help. But my parents saw me struggling and offered to pay for me to go to therapy, unprompted. I told them I couldn't do anything more than show up, so they found a therapist and arranged an appointment for me. I was lucky again because my therapist was a kind and gentle man who was able to help me immensely, and I can honestly say I think this saved my life. It's not like I got into therapy and all of a sudden all of my problems were gone and dealt with. It would take months of seeing my therapist and making other changes in my life before I can say I even felt happiness again. And years before I had made really meaningful progress on my depression. As cheesy of a line as it is, I do want to take a moment to say to anyone currently suffering from depression, it does get better. What they also don't tell you is it also gets worse again. Life is a constant undulation between good times and bad. It's what makes life interesting and exciting. But with the help of different resources, you can manage those bad times so they don't throw you down a dark well that's next to impossible to climb out of. Something else I don't hear talked about enough with depression is the seductive side of it. At its worst, it was a type of living hell. But part of the reason I think it took me so long to recover was that there were also times I enjoyed wrapping myself up in the darkness. Being depressed causes you to feel sadness and sorrow in a deep way. And in some ways, those were some of the most intense feelings or states I had ever been in, which offered its own kind of dark high. I reveled in the sadness and even leaned into it. I wanted to do 2 things today. Share a little bit about what my experience was like suffering from depression, and second, talk about my path out of being depressed and my mental health today. Before I just start discussing my path to a place of better mental health, let me just say that this is just what worked for me. And I am by no means an expert in the subject. I'm just talking about my experience in case it might be helpful to you. I never took medication, so I'm not going to talk about that. But I 100% believe that can be a vitally important tool if you are severely depressed. Obviously, I am a big proponent of therapy. My first therapist, Jim, was incredibly helpful to me in starting my recovery. And the subsequent therapists I've seen have been helpful as well, even when I was already doing much better. I've always tried to speak very openly about how helpful therapy has been to me because the first time I went to therapy, I lied to my friends about where I was going each week. I was embarrassed and thought they would think there was something wrong with me. If we hurt our leg or our shoulder, we would never feel ashamed to tell our friends we were seeing a doctor. But when we're struggling mentally, suddenly this shame creeps in. It's why I think it's so important to share with friends and family if therapy has helped you. When I first started my recovery, I felt incredibly stuck. One trick my therapist taught me that I still use today was to make to-do lists and to include a few basic, easy tasks on the list, as well as some of the things that felt more stressful that I needed to do that day. It sounds so simple and silly, but by including basic mundane tasks like showering, cleaning my room, and doing the dishes, it gave me an easy entry point to my day. As I crossed these easy items off the list, I had the feeling of momentum, that I was in the swing of my day, and the more difficult and stressful tasks felt easier to take on because I was already on a roll. This was incredibly helpful to me when I felt so paralyzed and depressed, but even today I use this trick to help me take on creative projects that are often hard to start. Two more pillars of my mental health are also basics: diet and exercise. These fall into the category of tools most of us know, but can still be hard to access. I was lucky because I had a foundation in running that I could rely on, but even then, it was very hard to motivate myself to move my body when I was depressed. And it was even harder to make the right choices about diet. However, as time went on and my mental health continued to improve, I was then able to start focusing on these more. Today, I am once again by no means perfect with my diet and exercise, but they are tools in my toolbox for when I start feeling down, stuck, or in a rut. Now, when I notice that I'm starting to struggle or fall into bad habits, I know that I have to refocus and dedicate myself to these two things, and typically I will even out or quickly start to feel better. Another huge part of my recovery and my happiness today was diving into Buddhist philosophy. I'm not particularly religious, but what I think is often missed about the world's major religions and their texts is that these ancient ideas recognize that it can be incredibly challenging to be a human being going through life on our planet. I think that many of those texts and ideas were meant to be taken as metaphors for how to deal with the challenges that arise in all of our lives. Personally, I was drawn to Buddhist philosophies, and specifically the kind of Western or American Buddhism brought back from India by people like Ram Dass, Jack Kornfield, and Sharon Salzberg, who all have many books, talks, and podcasts that are incredibly helpful and accessible. One of the most important lessons I learned for myself from these teachers and their ideas was that I needed to be so much more gentle with myself. I spent so much time in my head belittling myself, putting myself down, and generally thinking that I was a piece of shit. These teachings gently pointed out that if I saw one of my friends struggling the way that I was, that I wouldn't tell them they were worthless and bad because they were too depressed to leave the house. I would show them compassion and try to lovingly help them feel better. And wasn't it maybe a bit crazy that I couldn't show myself the same type of compassion and love that I would offer to any one of my friends? So I started concentrating on my thoughts, and when one would fly through my consciousness that was negative, I would grab it and look at it for a moment, and I would think, is it true that I'm a bad friend and no one likes me? Does the evidence of all the people in your life agree with that thought? No, so maybe we can let this thought go. It's not always easy, and I'm sure that for the rest of my life I will struggle to not let my thoughts define me. But in the simple act of bringing some attention to what is happening in your mind, you can take a huge step. One book that helped me immensely with this idea and with understanding it, and that I always recommend to people who say that they are struggling, is the book Radical Acceptance, Embracing Your Life with the Heart of a Buddha by Brach. And since we're doing book recommendations now, the other book that was foundational for my mental health is a book called Hardwiring Happiness by Hanson, which is a beautiful look at our mental health from both a psychological and neurological view to help us understand why these negative brain patterns occur. I wanted to share 2 more lessons that I learned from Buddhist teacher and philosopher Sharon Salzberg that have been incredibly helpful to me. The first is this very important idea that you are not your thoughts. For so long, I would have these negative thoughts about myself, and because I thought them, I assumed they were true, which is not the case at all. Sharon Salzberg has a beautiful metaphor that helped me access this idea. She said, you are like the sky, and your thoughts are like the clouds in the sky. They come and go, but they are not the sky. The second idea is that life has its ups and downs, that despite what society and capitalism are trying to tell you, you're not supposed to be happy all the time. Life can't be nothing but amazing experiences. And in fact, if it was, it would be incredibly dull. The problem is when life is hard, when things aren't going well, when you're getting down, it's easy to forget that this is part of the natural cycle of life and that it's going to get better again. Once again, Miss Salzberg has a beautiful metaphor to try to help you remember this. She explains life is like floating in the ocean, just off of shore. As a wave comes in, you float up to the top of the swell, and you see you're quite close to the shore. But then as the wave passes and the next wave approaches, you float down to the gully between the waves. And when you look around, all you can see on every side is ocean. And in those moments, it's easy to forget that the shore is still right there, and that when the next wave comes and raises you up, you will once again see the shore. These metaphors always bring me comfort when life starts to feel overwhelming or I start to get down on myself. Something else I have discovered more recently in my ongoing relationship with my mental health is the importance of having hobbies, which, if you wanted to say in a more serious way, is the importance of having meaning in your life. In my journey, I realized boredom often brought me to abusing vices and behaviors that were harmful to me. I found that the more I engaged with life, the more positive my experience was. A few years into my recovery, I was working, I would exercise, watch Netflix, go out to party with my friends, but that's really all I had. And even though I was much happier, I still wanted more. I realized I needed more things in my life besides just working and working out. Don't get me wrong, exercising is great and important, but I also think it's important to have an array of things you are engaging with in your life. It's one of the most common things I see in my friends' lives as well, and it's understandable because many of us have that voice in our heads telling us we can't do something, or obsessed about how the outcome would be, obsessed about how the outcome wouldn't be up to our standards. But what I've learned for me is that you have to remember that that voice isn't you either. And every time you try something new that feels scary, and you stick with it even though you suck at it at first, and then start to get better at it, it makes it easier to try the next thing or the thing after that. For me, the first hobby I picked up was doing backpacking trips in the backcountry. That gave me the confidence to say I wanted to learn the saxophone, so I started taking lessons and practicing. And it was really fun and I got better. So then I decided, even though I thought I wouldn't be good at it, maybe I could start doing yoga. After that, I thought I always wanted to do a podcast, so I started a podcast, and then another one, which eventually led me to making this YouTube channel to make silly videos that I enjoy so much. There are a million ways you can engage with life. You can learn to sew, you can paint, take an improv class, start trying to cook more challenging dishes, learn a language, or take up rock climbing. The point is, life is meant to be lived, and you can do that so much more fully by engaging with a few of the many opportunities life offers. The last thing I wanted to talk about in regards to my mental health is another basic, the importance of community and connection with your friends and family. It's also another thing I see a lot of my friends struggling with. I feel like I've said the words journey and path too much today, but I'm not articulate enough to come up with something different. So a big part of my journey was also learning to be more vulnerable and open with my parents and my friends. I think people worry that they don't want to burden their friends with what they're going through, while in fact, often by sharing your experience, you can grant them permission to share as well. And in my experience, this always deepens relationships. In fact, I would argue that the point of having friends in your life is to have people that you can lean on and that can lean on you, to have someone to share your experiences with so that you can both feel a little less alone in this world. It can be scary to open up and talk about what's going on with you, but personally, over time, I have done that, and I have been rewarded by deeper, more meaningful relationships and beautiful insights that I might not have had before. If we were all able to be a bit more vulnerable with each other, I think we would be surprised by how many people are struggling with the same things that we are. Life isn't always easy, and that's something we all share in common. Let me end by saying, if you're struggling, you're not alone, and things do get better. I am by no means a mental health expert. This is just my experience with depression and the tools that I've been able to use to manage it. My depression will always be a part of me. It's not something that I can just fix and then it's over and solved, but it can be managed. I don't have to let it drag me down into utter darkness. Some people have a bad back and they need to stretch it and wear proper shoes to take care of it. I have depression. I need to monitor it and use the tools I have to manage it if it flares up. I hope this was helpful or insightful. Thank you, and next week we'll be back with the silly ha-has. I have some really fun, exciting videos I'm really stoked to bring to you guys, and I think are going to be really funny. Thank you again for watching, and hopefully this can be helpful to you or to helping someone you know if they are, suffering from depression or any other sort of mental health issue. Thanks.